The Earth has always been a patient storyteller, whispering its tales not in words, but in stone, dust, and silence. Yet beneath that silence lies a void, a chapter of humanity so old, so deeply buried that it seems impossible. Could there have been a civilization thriving nearly 97,000 years ago, before the rise of Sa, before Egypt, before even the first known city? Could a world once full of knowledge and light have vanished without leaving a trace? Except for a few scattered clues, waiting for those who still listen to the hum of forgotten time. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're still awake, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Because in this quiet hour, we're about to descend into an older darkness. One where memory blurs into myth. Archaeology, for all its precision and confidence, still rests on the fragile foundation of what has survived. Most evidence of human life, wood, bone, fiber, even early architecture vanishes under the relentless churn of geology. When glaciers melt and continents shift, entire epochs disappear. According to the accepted timeline, civilization, meaning organized societies with writing, art, and agriculture, arose roughly 6,000 years ago. Before that, humans were hunters and wanderers. But over the past century, new evidence has emerged that does not fit this tidy story. At first, they were dismissed as anomalies. A shard of worked stone in the wrong layer. A pattern of alignments in bedrock. Carbon dates that stretched impossibly far back. Yet the anomalies kept multiplying. In 1957, archaeologists in the Levant unearthed a settlement in Jericho that was far older than the Bible's own city, a pre-pottery culture dating to 10,000 BC. Later came Quebec Tip in Turkey with its perfect stone pillars and carved animals built 11 to 500 years ago by supposed hunter-gatherers. That site alone doubled the known age of civilization. But what if even Gbisipe was only a remnant, a survivor from something far older? This is where the controversy begins. Some geologists and independent researchers have long argued that human civilization might not be a single linear ascent, but a cycle rising and falling with each cataclysm. According to this hypothesis, before the younger, driest cold period and the flooding that followed, a much earlier civilization flourished, possibly 80,000 to 100,000 years ago. Its traces would now lie beneath kilometers of sediment or beneath the sea, erased by the ice and the slow crush of time. Historians are still debating whether such an advanced culture could have existed during the last interglacial period. The Amiens, which peaked around 125,000 years ago. During that time, the climate was mild, forests spread across Africa and Eurasia, and sea levels were higher than today. Human species, including Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, coexisted, exchanging genes and perhaps ideas. Could this have been the environment in which the first true civilization, not merely a tribe, but a structured society, took root? There is no written record to confirm it, but there are whispers in geology. In parts of southern Africa, iron mines have been dated by some researchers to over 40,000 years ago. And controversially, a few claim much older origins. The artifacts found in places like Switzerland's Nwaya mine and the surrounding areas suggest systematic extraction and organization. If true, it would mean that early humans had mastered resource management tens of millennia before agriculture. Skeptics attribute these signs to natural processes or primitive digging. But others see a pattern, one of forgotten industry, later erased by extinction events and glacial floods. The ocean too hides its secrets. Over 20 million kilometers of continental shelves were dry land during the last glacial maximum. When the ice melted, those coastlines where early humans almost certainly lived drowned. That means the oldest human cities may now lie beneath hundreds of meters of water. It is not speculation. Sonar imaging has revealed vast geometric structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Caribbean. The best-known case is the Gulf of Camp off India's west coast, where a 2001 marine survey found regular stone patterns, columns, and what looked like foundations submerged beneath 120 feet of water. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts recovered their suggested ages up to 9,000 years. Though some claim older sediments could date to 30,000 years or more, mainstream science remains cautious. The currents of the Arabian Sea can scatter debris and natural formations can mimic architecture. Yet, it remains difficult to ignore the sheer precision of some shapes. Symmetrical walls, grid-like patterns, and linear avenues visible through sonar scans. If these were truly ancient cities, they would rewrite every assumption about early human history. And yet, nature erases its witnesses. Well, the sediments that preserve fossils can also crush civilizations into silence. Over 97,000 years, even the sturdiest walls would be reduced to mineral ghosts. To confirm such a civilization, scientists would need not only tools or ruins, but also symbols, writing, ritual, art, evidence of abstract thought. And while the earliest known cave paintings in France and Spain date to around 40,000 years ago, others, like those in Indonesia's Sulawesi caves, are far older, possibly 60,000 years or more. Some motifs are so complex that scholars have speculated about shared traditions passed down through unrecorded ages. One peculiar discovery often enters this discussion. A mysterious carved object found in Golden Heights known as the Venus of Barakat Ram. It dates between 230,000 and 800,000 years ago and bears deliberate human modification. Grooves and shapes suggestive of a female figure. If genuine, it would mean symbolic art predates modern humanity itself. Could this be an echo of an even earlier aesthetic consciousness, one capable of expression, memory, and perhaps architecture? Then there is the matter of the Toba eruption. One of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history, occurring about 74,000 years ago in present-day Indonesia. The blast may have plunged the planet into a volcanic winter lasting decades, reducing global temperatures and wiping out entire populations. Genetic studies show a bottleneck in human DNA around this time, suggesting our ancestors were reduced to as few as several thousand individuals. But if there had been a global civilization before Tabor, it would have been annihilated in an instant. The flood myths, the legends of fire and ash might all echo that extinction. Strangely, a few anomalies survive, like the metallic spheres discovered in South African mines dated to hundreds of millions of years old. Mainstream geology dismisses them as natural concretions formed by volcanic processes. Yet their perfect symmetry and etched grooves have led others to question whether they could be remnants of something older. Artifacts from a cycle of civilization now erased. The question that hangs over all this is not whether such a civilization existed, but whether it could have survived long enough to leave us a trace. The planet is a ruthless editor. The oldest ocean crust is constantly recycled by plate tectonics. Mountains rise and erode. Deserts consume cities. The Earth forgets. But in that forgetting, there remains a pattern, a rhythm of rise and fall that mirrors the very pulse of life itself. The first signs of that lost world are faint, almost dreamlike. Lines of stone beneath the tide, ancient carvings without context, shards of tools buried deeper than any known culture. They suggest intelligence, but not ours. Not quite. Perhaps they belong to a people who lived before memory, who watched the stars from a shoreline now drowned beneath the Indian Ocean. Some historians call this speculation. Others call it a necessary act of imagination. For what if the truth of our origins lies not ahead, but beneath, buried under the same earth that sustains us? What if the human story is not one of progress, but of rediscovery again and again after each forgetting? And so the question remains suspended in the night air somewhere beneath the silt and coral, beneath the black weight of the ocean. Does the earth still hold the bones of a forgotten age? The remnants of the first civilization that the world ever knew? When the last ice age reached its coldest point nearly 20,000 years ago, the sea had retreated more than 100 m below its present level. But before that, during the warmer interglacial period between 130,000 and 70,000 years ago, coastlines stretched far inland and fertile plains existed where only ocean lies today. If any civilization had risen during that forgotten window, its cities would have stood on those ancient shores, now swallowed by the sea. To find them, scientists look not to the deserts or forests, but to the drowned landscapes beneath the waves. There, silence reigns. No sound of human memory, only silt and coral blanketing what might once have been walls, plazas, or dwellings. But sonar and submersible scans have begun to reveal shapes that challenge what we think we know of the ancient world. One of the most striking of these discoveries lies beneath the Gulf of Camp off the coast of modern-day Gujarat, India. In 2001, a team from the National Institute of Ocean Technology deployed SIDCAN sonar to study pollution patterns and found to their astonishment geometric structures lying under 120 feet of water. Long parallel lines, right angles, and rectilinear foundations stretched for nearly 5 miles across the seabed. When dredging operations brought up pieces of pottery, stone tools, and even fossilized wood, the implications were staggering. Carbon dating on some materials returned ages of around 9,000 years. But sediment analysis hinted that the site itself might be far older, possibly 30,000 years or more. To the mainstream archaeological community, such numbers are unacceptable. Human civilization, in the accepted view, did not yet exist. And yet, the shapes remain. Even the currents that scour the Gulf cannot erase the strange precision of those lines. Historians are still debating whether these formations are natural or man-made. Some suggest they could be ancient river channels, their outlines coincidentally geometric. Others propose that if they are indeed architectural, they might belong to a culture predating the Indus Valley by tens of thousands of years. If that were true, then the Indus itself, one of the cradles of civilization, might have been built atop the ruins of an even older world. Further east, near Japan's Yonaguni Island, another submerged mystery rises from the depths. Discovered by diver Kihachi Arataki in 1986, the Yonani monument appears as a massive step pyramid carved into sandstone with terraces, stairways, and what look like roadways and altars. At first glance, it resembles a man-made temple. Some geologists insist it is merely a natural formation shaped by the fracturing of the rock along joint planes. But the monument's regularity, right-angled edges, smooth walls, and carved staircases leaves others unconvinced. Marine archaeologists who have mapped the site report features such as platforms aligned with cardinal directions and structures reminiscent of amphitheaters. Fossilized coral dating suggests submersion occurred at least 10,000 years ago, but the rock itself dates back millions. Whether carved intentionally or shaped by nature, the site has become a symbol of lost history. A glimpse perhaps into a civilization swept away before memory began. Beneath the South China Sea, researchers have identified what may be drowned settlements along the now submerged Sun Shelf, a landmass that once connected Indonesia, Malaysia, and parts of Southeast Asia into a single continent-sized region. During the last interglacial, these lands were dry. Rivers flowed across what are now shallow seas, creating fertile basins ideal for human life. Archaeologists have found evidence of early tool industries and shell mittens along the edges of the submerged plateau, suggesting that people indeed lived there long before rising seas consumed it. These discoveries fuel a controversial idea known as Sunderland hypothesis proposed by British archaeologist Stephen Oppenheimer. He argues that this vast drowned subcontinent may have been a cradle of early human culture whose survivors fled outward after the post-glacial floods, carrying with them the seeds of agriculture and myth. If true, then the ancient stories of floods from Mesopotamia to Polynesia might all trace back to the same source: the memory of a land lost beneath the rising sea. Yet beneath all this research lies a profound problem. The blast may have plunged the planet into a volcanic winter lasting decades, reducing global temperatures and wiping out entire populations. Genetic studies show a bottleneck in human DNA around this time, suggesting our ancestors were reduced to as few as several thousand individuals. But if there had been a global civilization before Tabor, it would have been annihilated in an instant. The flood myths, the legends of fire and ash might all echo that extinction. Strangely, a few anomalies survive, like the metallic spheres discovered in South African mines dated to hundreds of millions of years old. Mainstream geology dismisses them as natural concretions formed by volcanic processes. Yet their perfect symmetry and etched grooves have led others to question whether they could be remnants of something older. Artifacts from a cycle of civilization now erased. The question that hangs over all this is not whether such a civilization existed, but whether it could have survived long enough to leave us a trace. The planet is a ruthless editor. The oldest ocean crust is constantly recycled by plate tectonics. Mountains rise and erode. Deserts consume cities. The Earth forgets. But in that forgetting, there remains a pattern, a rhythm of rise and fall that mirrors the very pulse of life itself. The first signs of that lost world are faint, almost dreamlike. Lines of stone beneath the tide, ancient carvings without context, shards of tools buried deeper than any known culture. They suggest intelligence, but not ours. Not quite. Perhaps they belong to a people who lived before memory, who watched the stars from a shoreline now drowned beneath the Indian Ocean. Some historians call this speculation. Others call it a necessary act of imagination. For what if the truth of our origins lies not ahead, but beneath, buried under the same earth that sustains us? What if the human story is not one of progress, but of rediscovery again and again after each forgetting? And so the question remains suspended in the night air somewhere beneath the silt and coral, beneath the black weight of the ocean. Does the earth still hold the bones of a forgotten age? The remnants of the first civilization that the world ever knew? When the last ice age reached its coldest point nearly 20,000 years ago, the sea had retreated more than 100 m below its present level. But before that, during the warmer interglacial period between 130,000 and 70,000 years ago, coastlines stretched far inland and fertile plains existed where only ocean lies today. If any civilization had risen during that forgotten window, its cities would have stood on those ancient shores, now swallowed by the sea. To find them, scientists look not to the deserts or forests, but to the drowned landscapes beneath the waves. There, silence reigns. No sound of human memory, only silt and coral blanketing what might once have been walls, plazas, or dwellings. But sonar and submersible scans have begun to reveal shapes that challenge what we think we know of the ancient world. One of the most striking of these discoveries lies beneath the Gulf of Camp off the coast of modern-day Gujarat, India. In 2001, a team from the National Institute of Ocean Technology deployed SIDCAN sonar to study pollution patterns and found to their astonishment geometric structures lying under 120 feet of water. Long parallel lines, right angles, and rectilinear foundations stretched for nearly 5 miles across the seabed. When dredging operations brought up pieces of pottery, stone tools, and even fossilized wood, the implications were staggering. Carbon dating on some materials returned ages of around 9,000 years. But sediment analysis hinted that the site itself might be far older, possibly 30,000 years or more. To the mainstream archaeological community, such numbers are unacceptable. Human civilization, in the accepted view, did not yet exist. And yet, the shapes remain. Even the currents that scour the Gulf cannot erase the strange precision of those lines. Historians are still debating whether these formations are natural or man-made. Some suggest they could be ancient river channels, their outlines coincidentally geometric. Others propose that if they are indeed architectural, they might belong to a culture predating the Indus Valley by tens of thousands of years. If that were true, then the Indus itself, one of the cradles of civilization, might have been built atop the ruins of an even older world. Further east, near Japan's Yonaguni Island, another submerged mystery rises from the depths. Discovered by diver Kihachi Arataki in 1986, the Yanani monument appears as a massive step pyramid carved into sandstone with terraces, stairways, and what look like roadways and altars. At first glance, it resembles a man-made temple. Some geologists insist it is merely a natural formation shaped by the fracturing of the rock along joint planes. But the monument's regularity, right-angled edges, smooth walls, and carved staircases leaves others unconvinced. Marine archaeologists who have mapped the site report features such as platforms aligned with cardinal directions and structures reminiscent of amphitheaters. Fossilized coral dating suggests submersion occurred at least 10,000 years ago, but the rock itself dates back millions. Whether carved intentionally or shaped by nature, the site has become a symbol of lost history. A glimpse perhaps into a civilization swept away before memory began. Beneath the South China Sea, researchers have identified what may be drowned settlements along the now submerged Sun Shelf, a landmass that once connected Indonesia, Malaysia, and parts of Southeast Asia into a single continent-sized region. During the last interglacial, these lands were dry. Rivers flowed across what are now shallow seas, creating fertile basins ideal for human life. Archaeologists have found evidence of early tool industries and shell mittens along the edges of the submerged plateau, suggesting that people indeed lived there long before rising seas consumed it. These discoveries fuel a controversial idea known as Sunderland hypothesis proposed by British archaeologist Stephen Oppenheimer. He argues that this vast drowned subcontinent may have been a cradle of early human culture whose survivors fled outward after the post-glacial floods, carrying with them the seeds of agriculture and myth. If true, then the ancient stories of floods from Mesopotamia to Polynesia might all trace back to the same source: the memory of a land lost beneath the rising sea. Yet beneath all this research lies a profound problem. They showed signs of mass production, hundreds of similar shapes, as if designed for trade or distribution. Could these have been the remnants of an organized economy or the traces of a people capable of standardization of industry? If so, they may have vanished during the same catastrophe that wiped the earth clean: the eruption of Mount Toba. The Toba catastrophe roughly 74,000 years ago was one of the most violent volcanic events in 2 million years. Its plume of ash circled the globe, blocking sunlight, collapsing ecosystems and plunging the planet into a volcanic winter. Entire species died. Some scientists believe human population numbers dropped to mere thousands. But others propose something more complex, that the catastrophe acted as a cultural bottleneck, preserving only fragments of older knowledge among isolated survivors. Perhaps the myths of fire, rebirth, and divine punishment scattered across human cultures trace back to this apocalyptic dawn. In South Africa's Mpumalanga region lies a circular stone ruin known as Adam's calendar, aligned precisely with the solstices. Its age is controversial. Some claim it is no more than a few thousand years old. Others, using erosion and astronomical alignment models, suggest it could be over 75,000. If true, it would be the oldest known megalithic calendar in the world. A structure implying astronomical understanding, architecture, and planning far beyond the supposed capabilities of Stone Age hunter-gatherers. Critics argue it is a natural formation. Supporters call it a relic of the first civilization. The debate itself has become a microcosm of a larger question: how much of early human history is truly lost and how much we refuse to see? The pattern of early megaliths does not end in Africa. In Siberia, the megalithic blocks of Mount Shia astonish even seasoned geologists. Gigantic stone rectangles, some weighing hundreds of tons, lie stacked and fused together in patterns that seem too deliberate for nature. Yet, unlike the pyramids or Stonehenge, there are no carvings, no inscriptions, no tools left behind. The origin remains unknown. The granite has been dated to ancient geological time, but that only tells us when the rock formed, not when it was shaped. Similarly, in the Bolivian Andes, the site of Pumapunku features stones cut with such precision that a sheet of paper cannot fit between their joints. Though officially dated to about 1,500 years ago, some fragments appear to have been reworked from even older ruins. Geologists have noted patterns of erosion inconsistent with the local climate, as if the stones once stood exposed to intense rainfall thousands of years before recorded history. A few researchers have gone so far as to suggest that the builders of Pumapunku might have been inheriting techniques, the remnants of geometry, alignment, and stone manipulation passed down from cultures much older than themselves. What connects these sites is not location but pattern, an obsession with stone, symmetry, and celestial order. Wherever we find early signs of human complexity, whether in Asia, Africa, or the Americas, the sky seems always to play a role. Alignments with solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of specific stars repeat again and again. This suggests a worldview already deeply structured by observation and abstraction, hallmarks of civilization. One of the most perplexing questions concerns how such knowledge could arise without a clear lineage. Civilization, according to textbooks, progresses gradually. Fire, tool, language, agriculture, cities. But the archaeological record sometimes behaves differently. Advanced knowledge appears, vanishes, and reappears centuries or even millennia later. It is as if humanity repeatedly wakes from amnesia, remembering fragments of a dream it once lived. There are even deeper anomalies. In 1972, geologists in Gabon discovered a uranium deposit at Oklo that had undergone a self-sustaining nuclear reaction nearly 2 billion years ago. While this event was natural, the precision of its reaction zones led some early investigators to half-jokingly ask whether intelligent intervention had occurred. Though now explained by natural chemistry, the discovery remains a reminder of how strange natural processes can mimic intelligence and how easily our ancestors' technological remnants, if they existed, could vanish without a trace over 100,000 years. Still, the persistence of carved, aligned, and shaped stones in unexpected places keeps curiosity alive. In Jordan's desert, ancient geoglyphs known as kites. Massive patterns only visible from the air date back at least 9,000 years. Their purpose remains mysterious. Some archaeologists now believe similar formations may exist beneath sand layers across the Arabian Peninsula, undetected by satellites. If so, they could extend far deeper into time, perhaps even toward that elusive period 97,000 years ago when the Earth's surface was rearranged by glaciers, storms, and fire. Historians are still debating whether the alignment patterns in early megaliths, circular stone temples, standing pillars, and buried complexes imply communication or shared inheritance. Some suggest parallel evolution, that humans across continents simply looked to the stars and built accordingly. Others suspect diffusion, the survival of a single ancient system of measurement and thought, passed down through oral memory after each global upheaval. The hypothesis of a pre-Tober civilization rests on the idea that intelligence and culture might have existed long before writing. Archaeologists are cautious for good reason. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Yet, as discoveries accumulate, tools out of place, ruins, misstated genetic signals unexplained, the line between skepticism and curiosity grows thinner. Perhaps the code in the stone is not a literal script, but a pattern of recurrence. The human desire to impose order on chaos, to align heaven and earth, to remember even after forgetting. Beneath our feet, under layers of ash and sediment, there may still lie the buried floors of ancient cities, their stones engraved with symbols long eroded, their meanings beyond recall. We may never read them, but we can feel their gravity. The weight of forgotten ages pressing upward through the soil, whispering of a time when knowledge was measured not in words, but in the rhythm of stars upon stone. And if those stones truly hold a code, a message from an age before the last great darkness, then decoding it may mean more than rewriting history. It may mean realizing that history never stopped. It merely began again and again. If stone is the silent memory of the earth, then fire is its voice. Bright, fleeting, impossible to ignore. Fire defines humanity. It separates us from the beast. Yet it binds us to the oldest mysteries of creation. To master fire is to control energy, to transform the raw into the refined. It is the first technology and possibly the first symbol of civilization. But what if the first great flame, the one that illuminated a true human culture, burned tens of thousands of years before the world believes it began? Archaeologists have long assumed that metallurgy, mining, and organized pirate technology emerged only around 6,000 years ago when people in Mesopotamia learned to smelt copper and craft bronze. Yet scattered across the continents are hints that fire's mastery may have begun far earlier. So early, in fact, that its first engineers have no names, no myths, and no graves. In southern Africa, deep beneath the rolling hills of Swaziland lies the mine, officially the oldest known mining site on Earth. Radioarbon samples from charcoal fragments found in its tunnels date back more than 43,000 years. But some layers, according to older geological measurements, might stretch even deeper into time, perhaps 70,000 or more. The mine yielded hematite, a reddish iron ore used not only for pigment, but possibly for metallurgy. Microscopic traces of controlled fire suggest that the miners roasted the ore before extraction, a deliberate act of chemical transformation, implying knowledge of heat's power to change matter. Historians are still debating whether the operation was purely symbolic, producing ochre for ritual use, or practical, supplying iron for unknown purposes. Some researchers even suggest that the people who dug those tunnels were not Homo sapiens at all, but an earlier hominin species that understood fire in ways we do not yet comprehend. Farther north in the deserts of Egypt, another enigma burned silently in the sand. The mysterious glass fields of the Libyan desert scattered over hundreds of kilometers. The glass is pure silica created by temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than any known natural fire. The mainstream explanation attributes the glass to a meteor impact or air burst roughly 29 million years ago. But among ancient Egyptian artifacts, a carved scarab made from the same desert glass was found in Tutankhamun's pectoral. Some fringe researchers wonder if humanity once rediscovered this intense heat long before Egypt's rise. Perhaps through forgotten methods of smelting or atmospheric fire. In Australia, deep caves have revealed evidence of hearths dating back more than 65,000 years maintained by early Aboriginal populations. Charcoal fragments and burned bones show continuous occupation, the oldest sustained use of fire by Homo sapiens. But the remarkable part is the consistency. The fires were placed in the same locations for thousands of years, suggesting communal planning, continuity, and possibly ritual. The flicker of those ancient flames may have illuminated songs, ceremonies, and maps long before the first cities. There is also the question of metal. Small enigmatic objects have surfaced in places where they should not exist. In the late 20th century, miners in South Africa reportedly discovered metallic spheres within Precambrian rock, the so-called Klerksdorp spheres. Though most geologists classify them as natural concretions, their symmetry and etched grooves continue to puzzle observers. Could they have been produced by early human heat treatment of mineral nodules? A rudimentary form of metallurgy that predated recorded history by tens of millennia. Fire also appears to have been used not only to forge tools, but to shape the landscape itself. In parts of northern Australia and Africa, controlled burns were practiced to encourage the growth of certain plants and attract grazing animals, a primitive form of agriculture. Charred soil layers suggest that such fire stick farming began as early as 100,000 years ago. If true, it would mean that humanity's first act of environmental engineering predates the Neolithic Revolution by almost an entire ice age. Then there are the mines, deep, ordered, and methodical. In the mountains of Serbia, in a region called Rudner Glava, shafts descend into copper-rich veins dated to over 7,000 years ago. Yet similar extraction marks have been found in older, less studied contexts, particularly in parts of Central Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. The pattern of repeated excavation combined with evidence of fire setting, a method of heating rock to fracture it for easier extraction, suggests that this technique might be much older than believed. The use of fire setting is mentioned in Bronze Age texts, but the physics of it are universal. Heat expands rock, water cools and cracks it. Could Paleolithic engineers have discovered this by observation and passed it down through oral tradition long before written language existed? Historians are still debating whether such continuity is even possible. Mainstream models describe pre-agricultural humans as nomadic without permanent architecture or organized labor. Yet fire itself demands organization. To sustain furnaces, control airflow, and process minerals requires coordination, a division of roles, and shared understanding of cause and effect. It requires not just intelligence, but cooperation, and that is civilization in embryo. In caves across Eurasia, the soot patterns tell their own story. At sites like Kesem Cave in Israel, circular fire pits dating back more than 300,000 years reveal evidence of regular cooking, tool production, and light maintenance. The hearths were rebuilt in the same locations again and again, implying social continuity. Archaeologists found bones split for marrow extraction, fat residues burned for light, behavior suggesting not mere survival, but mastery of the environment. Fire for them was not a novelty. It was culture. Later, the pattern becomes more symbolic. Around 40,000 years ago, pigments appear alongside hearths, hinting at an aesthetic awakening. Ochre mixed with animal fat creates a vivid red hue used for body paint, cave art, and burial rituals. The same pigment appears in Neanderthal sites, Denis oven layers, and early Homo sapiens settlements alike, as though fire and color were intertwined in the ancient imagination. Red became the color of blood, life, and dawn, a sacred symbol that would endure across ages. Some researchers now propose that these ancient fire rituals could have encoded astronomical knowledge in several caves in Europe and Indonesia. Clusters of red dots and hand stencils align with specific star constellations visible at the time the paintings were made. If this interpretation is correct, early humans were using pigment and firelight together as mnemonic tools to record the heavens before writing existed. The fusion of fire and symbol also gave birth to myth. In nearly every culture, the story of the first flame is a tale of theft, divine punishment, or forbidden knowledge. Prometheus bringing fire to man, Maui stealing it from the underworld, or the Dune people of Mali receiving it from celestial beings. Such myths may preserve fragments of ancient truth, a memory of how dangerous and transformative fire once was. The first metallurgists must have seemed like magicians bending stone into liquid, summoning light from darkness. And perhaps they were magicians of a kind. Scientists before science, shamans who blended observation with ritual. Fire, after all, requires faith as much as knowledge. It consumes everything, yet promises rebirth. To the forgotten civilizations of prehistory, it may have been both tool and god. The idea that organized metallurgy could have existed 97,000 years ago sounds impossible. Yet consider how little survives from that era. Clay furnaces crumble. Charcoal vanishes. Copper oxidizes to dust. Only slag, the hardened residue of smelting, could endure. And indeed, strange blackened stones found in parts of sub-Sahara and Africa and western India bear a curious resemblance to metallurgical byproducts. Though their ages are uncertain, it is tempting to see in these remnants a continuity of discovery. Fire is both destroyer and creator, teacher and executioner. Every civilization that followed, Sumer, Egypt, the Indies, built upon its lessons, learning to smelt, to cast, to forge. But maybe they were only remembering. If a forgotten people once walked this earth, harnessing flame long before the written word, their story would have ended as all fires do, not extinguished, but buried beneath the ashes of their own brilliance. The smoke would rise, drift, and fade into legend, and all that would remain are blackened stones, silent proof that someone once knew how to call the sun to earth and hold it for a brief and shining moment in the palm of their hand. Long before stone could be carved or fire could be tamed, memory was already being written, not on walls but within flesh. Every heartbeat that has ever lived carries a record of the past, inscribed not in ink, but in code. The double helix of DNA, spiraled and silent, is history's oldest archive. Through it, modern science has begun to uncover something unexpected. Traces of ancestors whose faces we have never seen and whose civilizations may have vanished tens of thousands of years before the known dawn of humanity. For most of the 20th century, our species' lineage was thought to be simple. Homo sapiens arose in Africa about 200,000 years ago, spread outward, and slowly replaced older hominins like the Neanderthals. The story was neat, linear, comforting. But as genetic technology advanced, that simplicity began to unravel. Deep within the genome of nearly every living person outside Africa, scientists found fragments, sequences that did not belong to Homo sapiens at all. They came from others, cousins, rivals, perhaps even teachers. Historians are still debating whether these traces represent brief encounters or long cohabitation. What is known is that Neanderthals, far from being brutish cavemen, possessed brains as large as ours, buried their dead and crafted tools with intricate precision. Some carried pigments and feathers, perhaps for decoration. In Siberia's Denisova cave, geneticists uncovered an entirely new lineage, the Denisovans, whose DNA still lives on in parts of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. These ancient people left behind only fragments of bone and a single finger. Yet their genetic signature remains strong in modern Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians. What intrigues researchers most, however, are the ghost lineages, genetic contributions that cannot be traced to any known fossil group. Some populations in Africa, particularly among the Yoruba and the Mbuti, carry up to 19% of their genome from an unknown hominin, a being for which no bones have yet been found. Others show evidence of admixture events dating between 80,000 and 120,000 years ago, precisely during the time when a supposed lost civilization might have flourished. Could these genetic ghosts represent the biological descendants of that forgotten culture? It is of course speculation. But if an early society had reached an advanced stage, one with longue distance communication, trade, or shared rituals, then interbreeding between populations would have been not an accident, but a cultural exchange. The traces of those unions might survive today, invisible but undeniable. One of the most mysterious genetic anomalies lies in a sequence known as the microphyllin Dow, which appeared suddenly around 37,000 years ago and spread rapidly across Eurasia. It affects brain growth and may influence cognitive processing. Some scientists have proposed that it entered the Homo sapiens genome through interbreeding with an unknown archaic population, one genetically distant but intellectually comparable. If so, then part of modern human intelligence could be an inheritance from a vanished branch of humanity. In 2013, DNA recovered from the fur of a 45,000-year-old man found near him in Siberia revealed an even older puzzle. Genetic diversity patterns suggested that interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals had occurred not 50,000 but possibly 80,000 to 100,000 years ago, meaning Homo sapiens had already expanded into Eurasia long before the supposed Great Migrations. That early wave of explorers left no cities, no monuments, only bloodlines. But they may have carried fragments of a knowledge system older than anything we now recognize. In this view, DNA becomes more than biology. It becomes archaeology. Genetic markers trace migrations not just across space, but through time, revealing forgotten journeys. For instance, the mitochondrial haplogroup L3, the maternal ancestor of all non-African peoples, likely emerged around 70,000 to 90,000 years ago. Its descendants spread into Arabia and beyond. But small subbranches like M and N appear to have diverged earlier than models predict, implying pre-existing populations already living in those regions. Were these descendants of a proto-civilization rooted in the warm interglacial world, later displaced by the cold? Some researchers now propose that multiple human populations developed symbolic behavior independently, or perhaps inherited it from a shared ancestor that flourished before the Toba eruption. In caves from Spain to Borneo, ochre pigments and shell beads appear around similar times, as though a spark had ignited across continents. Could this have been the echo of a single event, the transmission of knowledge from a central source? If a forgotten civilization did exist nearly 97,000 years ago, it may have left no monuments except the genetic fingerprints we still carry. After all, culture is not only built in stone. It is also built in instinct, habit, and predisposition. The subtle architecture of the mind. The sudden appearance of language capacity, for instance, remains one of biology's great mysteries. The FOXP2 gene, associated with speech and syntax, mutated in humans sometime before 100,000 years ago. Yet its pattern suggests a selective sweep, meaning it spread quickly, as though guided by intense advantage. Some anthropologists suspect it was not a slow evolution, but a transmission, perhaps a learned adaptation from contact with another, more linguistically advanced population. Elsewhere, genetic evidence points to population expansions after catastrophic events. Following the Toba eruption, humanity's numbers may have shrunk to a few thousand. Yet within 10 millennia, genetic diversity rebounded dramatically. Such rapid recovery implies not random survival, but coordination, migration, shared knowledge, perhaps the deliberate preservation of certain lineages. Could a surviving remnant of that older civilization have safeguarded its genetic and cultural legacy through ritual or controlled breeding practices? The notion is controversial but not impossible. In the cold caves of Denisova, DNA extracted from soil, not bones, but the dust itself has revealed continuous human occupations stretching back 200,000 years. Layers of different species overlap like the pages of an unwritten chronicle. Neanderthal, Denisvan, modern human. They shared the same fire pits, perhaps the same songs. If they traded words, tools, or partners, then the line between species becomes less clear, and the notion of a singular civilization more plausible. It may not have been a kingdom or an empire, but a network of related peoples connected by memory and blood. Historians are still debating whether this mosaic of interbreeding represents chaos or complexity. Traditional anthropology favors separation, clear categories, neat genealogies. But evolution is seldom neat. It thrives on blending, adaptation, and exchange. Each encounter between two ancient tribes might have been a meeting of worlds. The transmission of myths, fire techniques, or even proto-writing symbols scratched on bone. None of these would survive in stone, but they might persist in thought, shaping the neural wiring of future generations. Even today, echoes of those ancient unions linger in our physiology. Tibetans, for example, owe their extraordinary adaptation to high altitudes to a Denisovan-derived gene called ES1. It allows efficient oxygen use, a gift from an extinct people who once roamed the mountains of Central Asia. Similarly, immune system variations in Europeans and Asians trace back to Neanderthal Alice, providing resistance to pathogens that once plagued Ice Age environments. These are not random inheritances. They are the practical legacies of encounter, evolutionary memories of cooperation and survival. Yet beneath the scientific data lies a haunting implication. We are not alone, not in ancestry and perhaps not in origin. Humanity, as we define it, may be the child of many parents, some known, some lost. Our blood is a library, and within its spirals lie entire civilizations that vanished before the first written word. If an ancient world once existed 97,000 years ago, its people might still walk among us in a sense. Their faces are ours, their voices in our genes, their endurance encoded in every cell that breathes and dreams. We have forgotten their names, but they have not forgotten us. The genetic code, indifferent yet faithful, preserves their whispers, fragments of a story older than the Earth's last ice, older than the sea's last breath. And as scientists continue to map the genome, each discovery deepens the mystery. Every new sequence found in human DNA, every unexplained fragment or misplaced mutation, may be another doorway into that hidden epoch, another clue that civilization in one form or another existed long before history began. Perhaps when the final genetic puzzle is complete, it will not reveal the first humans, but the last survivors of a world already ancient. A civilization that lived, loved, and vanished beneath the same sky we see now, leaving only their code behind, spiraling forever in the dark silence of our blood. Before satellites and compasses, before the first recorded journeys of explorers, there existed a strange knowledge of the world. One that seems to have mapped places no human should have known. Long before the known civilizations of Egypt, Sumer, or Greece, someone somewhere may have charted the shape of the Earth itself. Their maps or fragments of them have surfaced throughout history, hinting at a civilization that understood geography, mathematics, and astronomy tens of thousands of years before the accepted timeline allows. Historians are still debating whether these artifacts represent advanced ancient science or a series of coincidences and misinterpretations, but the consistency of their anomalies and their impossible accuracy continues to challenge scholars even today. The most famous example lies rolled away in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, the Pyrrhus map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral using sources that he claimed were very old maps. It depicts the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and South America with astonishing precision. More curious still, it shows the northern coast of Antarctica, not as it is today, buried under ice, but as it would appear, ice-free. Modern geologists confirm that Antarctica's true coastline has been hidden for thousands of years. The only way to reconstruct it accurately is through advanced seismic mapping, a technology not developed until the 20th century. Yet the Piers map portrays it with uncanny accuracy. If Admiral Rice merely copied from older charts, where did his sources come from? Could they have been remnants of a pre-Ice Age civilization that had mapped the globe when sea levels and climates were different? Skeptics argue that the Antarctica on the map could be a distorted depiction of South America, drawn by sailors guessing at unknown lands. But there are other maps. The Arancius Finas map of 1531, the Boo map of 1737 that shows similar southern continents complete with river systems and mountain ranges beneath the modern ice cap. The persistence of this image across centuries among mapmakers with no connection to one another raises an uncomfortable question. Were they all copying from a single ancient source? The hypothesis of an antediluvian topographic tradition was popularized in the 20th century by scholars who noticed recurring geometric relationships in early maps, alignments consistent with the curvature of the Earth, latitude and longitude, and even spherical projection. These are techniques requiring not only mathematics but also global observation. To achieve such precision, one must measure distances over vast stretches of ocean and land, a feat believed impossible before modern navigation. Yet some prehistoric sites appear aligned to the same latitudes and cardinal directions used by these mysterious mapmakers. In South America, for example, the megalithic complex of Tiwanaku align perfectly with the Tropic of Capricorn. Across the ocean, the pyramids of Giza, the temples of Angkor, and the lost city of Nanmadol all follow similar astronomical grids. This suggests a system of measurement that transcended geography. A shared knowledge of Earth's geometry preserved across cultures separated by oceans. If we look even deeper, mathematical echoes appear in myths. The Sumerians divided the circle into 360 degrees and used a base 60 numbering system, the same geometry that underlies modern navigation. But such abstraction does not arise overnight. It presupposes centuries of observation and refinement. Where did they learn it? Some historians propose it was inherited, passed down from earlier peoples whose mastery of the heavens predated recorded time. One possibility lies in the study of paleogeography, the science of Earth's shifting surface. During the last interglacial period, roughly 125,000 years ago, the world looked vastly different. Sea levels were higher and large parts of Antarctica were free of ice. What we call the Sahara Desert was then a fertile region of rivers and lakes. If an advanced culture had existed during that warm period, its coastal settlements and ports would now lie hundreds of meters below the sea or buried beneath shifting sands. From such vantage points, they could have mapped the continents as they truly were. The evidence is circumstantial but tantalizing. The ancient city of Caral in Peru, dated to about 5,000 years ago, displays a level of urban planning and astronomical alignment that seems to appear fully formed without precedent. Similarly, the star-aligned structures at Nabda Playa in Egypt, dated over 7,000 years old, show advanced understanding of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, a phenomenon that requires millennia to observe. Could the builders of these monuments have inherited their knowledge from a culture already ancient in their own time? Some geographers point to even stranger clues, global alignments that connect sacred sites across continents. A great circle drawn through Giza, Easter Island, Machu Picchu, and Angkor, what follows a nearly perfect arc of 23.5 degrees, the same tilt as Earth's axis. While coincidence is possible, the probability of so many monuments sharing that alignment is statistically low. It suggests a forgotten geodetic network, a system of mapping that once spanned the globe, lost after the cataclysms of the late Pleistocene. To understand how such a network could have existed, one must imagine a civilization with seafaring capabilities far beyond what is accepted for that era. Archaeologists once doubted humans could cross open oceans before 3000 BC. Yet recent discoveries have rewritten that assumption. Stone tools found on the island of Crete date to over 130,000 years ago, implying early humans were already navigating long before the known rise of agriculture. Similar finds on islands in Indonesia and the Philippines reveal ancient crossings requiring advanced planning and cooperative effort. If these navigators charted coastlines, their maps would have been carved on perishable materials, leather, bark, or papyrus, long since erased by time. But the knowledge itself could have endured in symbolic form, star mythology, and the language of sacred geometry. Many ancient traditions describe gods or sages who measured the earth. The Egyptian Thoth, the Sumerian Enki, the Greek Hermes, all associated with wisdom, architecture, and the ordering of the world. Perhaps these were not gods at all, but cultural memories of prehistoric topographers whose deeds became myth. Historians are still debating whether myths can preserve factual geography. Yet recent linguistic studies suggest that oral traditions can transmit accurate environmental details for tens of thousands of years. Aboriginal Australian stories describe coastal features now submerged, matching geological reconstructions from 7,000 years ago. If such fidelity can persist for millennia, how much more might survive from an epoch when entire continents were different? The forgotten mapmakers, whoever they were, must have perceived Earth not as a flat plane, but as a living sphere, an organism of water, wind, and line. Their geometry was sacred because it mirrored nature's order. When later civilizations rose from the ruins of the Ice Age, they rebuilt upon that geometry instinctively, aligning temples with solstices, cities with stars. The grid was already there, invisible but enduring, like a ghost pattern beneath the soil of time. Some modern scholars exploring these patterns have begun to speak of a geodetic memory, the idea that humanity subconsciously rebuilds upon ancient alignments as if guided by a buried instinct. The same proportional constants that appear in the Great Pyramid re-emerge in the architecture of medieval cathedrals and modern observatories. Whether by coincidence or inheritance, the mathematics remains consistent. If this is true, then we may all be heirs to the forgotten mapmakers. Their knowledge scattered by flood and fire may still shape our cities, our calendars, even our sense of direction. Perhaps they were the first to understand that the world itself is a pattern, that every horizon leads to another, and that knowledge like the sea always returns. What remains now are fragments, strange maps in old libraries, stone circles that point to the stars, myths of travelers who measured the oceans before the world froze. Their legacy is neither confirmed nor denied, only suspended between science and story, between what we know and what we once knew somewhere beneath the ice of Antarctica, or under the silt of drowned continental shelves. Their ports may still sleep, harbors of an age when the stars were both compass and scripture. And when we rediscover them, we will not merely redraw our maps. We will rediscover ourselves, the oldest navigators of a world that never truly forgot its shape. When the Ice Age receded and the great glaciers melted, they left behind not only new rivers and coastlines, but deserts. What are now arid wastes were once green plains dotted with lakes and forests, home to animals and perhaps to civilizations that have vanished entirely. The Sahara, today an ocean of dunes stretching from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, was not always a desert. Tens of thousands of years ago, it was a place of rain and rivers, a landscape alive with vegetation and life. And according to a growing number of researchers, it may have been the cradle of a civilization far older than Egypt. Satellite imagery, radar scans, and paleoclimate studies have revealed a lost world beneath the dunes, dry rivers, ancient deltas, and even traces of what appear to be vast basins that once held inland seas. Archaeologists call this era the Green Sahara, a period that repeated several times over the last few hundred years. The most recent one between 120,000 and 80,000 years ago coincides hauntingly with the possible age of a forgotten human culture. At the heart of this mystery lies the Riechet structure, the Eye of the Sahara. Seen from above, it resembles a giant spiral 40 kilometers wide carved into the Mauritanian desert. Its concentric rings of stone rise and fall like the remains of a colossal city erased by time. Geologists classify it as a deeply eroded dome of rock formed by natural uplift and erosion. But some historians and independent researchers have wondered if it could once have been something else, a port or city circular and ordered that mirrored the stars or the sea. Theories surrounding the richer structure have only grown more fascinating with technology. Its inner rings align roughly with cardinal directions, and some surrounding formations bear geometric regularities unusual for natural erosion. Sediment samples reveal traces of ancient riverbeds that once flowed through the site toward the Atlantic, implying that it once lay near fertile deltas rather than in the desert's heart. Some have even proposed that these ancient waterways could have supported human habitation during the last interglacial period, the same time frame as the hypothesized 97,000-year-old civilization. Historians are still debating whether such interpretations verge on fantasy or point toward an actual prehistoric settlement. Excavations in the surrounding Adra Plateau have uncovered tools, hearths, and rock engravings tens of thousands of years old, depicting giraffes, elephants, and hippos, creatures of a green living Sahara. These drawings are not random art. They suggest a stable, observing society, one capable of depicting and recording its world. If these people were merely hunter-gatherers, their organization and output were still far beyond what was thought possible at the time. Farther east in the Tibetan mountains of Chadin, Libya, similar petroglyphs cover the canyon walls, herds of cattle, human figures, spirals, and sunbursts. Some carvings show domesticated animals thousands of years before known domestication occurred. Others display celestial symbols that may represent constellations. The implication is staggering that a proto-astronomical culture thrived in Africa long before the rise of Sumer or Egypt. It is tempting to connect these Saharan cultures to later civilizations. Egypt's earliest dynasties, for example, emerged from peoples who migrated from the southwest directly from the Sahara's once green regions. Archaeologists have found striking continuities in art and symbols, concentric circles, solar motifs, and stylized cattle worship. Perhaps the founders of Egypt carried with them the memory of the older world they had lost, a world that the desert consumed. The idea of buried cities beneath the sands is not new. Explorers have long spoken of ruins glimpsed after shifting dunes, of stone walls and half-buried columns. Many of these stories prove to be mirages or natural formations. But modern radars change the game. NASA's imaging of North Africa has revealed hundreds of hidden structures beneath the dunes, including entire river networks and rectangular foundations. Some are located in areas that have been untouched by humans for millennia. Could these be remnants of prehistoric settlements entombed beneath layers of dust and time? Similar discoveries have occurred far beyond Africa. In the Arabian Peninsula, now among the driest places on Earth, paleoenvironmental studies show that large lakes once covered regions like the Rabalkali, the Empty Quarter. Around these vanished lakes, researchers have found stone tools and hearths dating back over 80,000 years. Satellite scans even suggest the presence of long straight ridges, possibly ancient causeways or trade paths. The Arabian Peninsula, it seems, may once have been a corridor for migration or civilization, linking Africa to Asia during the interglacial warmth. In 2017, researchers from Oxford in Saudi Arabia discovered hundreds of mysterious stone structures across the Haro Kbar region of northwestern Arabia. Built from dark basalt, they form geometric patterns visible only from the air, triangles, circles, and long walls stretching for kilom. Some are aligned with solstice points, others with extinct volcanoes. Their purpose remains unknown. Some call them gates or desert kites, perhaps for hunting or ritual. Yet their sheer scale and design suggest planning, an eye for geometry. That feels familiar to the builders of megaliths across the world. Could these be the eastern traces of the same people who once lived in the Green Sahara? Refugees who migrated as climate shifted and the desert grew? Genetic data suggests that early populations moved both northward into the Levant and eastward into Arabia around this time, carrying with them technologies, symbols, and perhaps stories of their drowned homeland. One of the most persistent of those stories appears in myth. In many ancient traditions, from Berber legends to Sumerian epics, there is a recurring tale of a lost land swallowed by sand or sea. The gods punish hubris, the rivers vanish, and the survivors wander east to rebuild. The details differ, but the emotional core remains. Memory of a paradise lost to catastrophe. Perhaps this isn't myth at all, but cultural memory of the Sahara's death, an apocalypse witnessed by human eyes nearly 90,000 years ago. And yet, nature continues to guard its secret. Excavations in the Central Sahara often end abruptly when tools strike endless layers of compacted sand. Beneath lie sediments thick enough to conceal entire cities. Ground-penetrating radar, though powerful, cannot easily distinguish between natural and artificial formations when buried so deeply. Each new season of wind rearranges the dunes, erasing whatever traces briefly emerge. It is as if the desert itself conspires to hide what it once nurtured. Historians are still debating how much of this buried landscape could truly harbor ruins. The scale of desertification was immense, a transformation that unfolded over thousands of years as monsoon patterns shifted. Lakes evaporated, animals migrated, and human populations followed. But for a time before the end came, there would have been cities beside rivers, farms along floodplains, and temples under a gentle sky. If the eye of the Sahara once looked upon such a city, concentric, organized, thriving, its destruction may have been gradual, not sudden. Drought after drought, the rivers would have dwindled, crops failed. The people left carrying with them stories of a circle city at the world center. Stories that might have traveled into Egypt and Greece, transforming over generations into the legend of Atlantis. Modern science cannot yet confirm that any advanced society truly existed there 97,000 years ago. But each year as satellites peer deeper into the sand, more evidence emerges of complexity, of life where none should have been. The Sahara may yet yield its dead cities, and with them the missing chapters of human history. In the end, the desert is both tomb and guardian. It buries its treasures, but it also preserves them. Beneath those silent dunes may sleep the first cities humanity ever built. Their streets long turned to dust, their walls reduced to whispers. But their pattern, circular, enduring, eternal, still faintly visible when the light is right and the sand shifts, revealing for a moment the memory of a world that refused to die. Long before ink dried on parchment, humanity wrote its first histories in the language of myth. Legends, songs, and sacred tales carried truth through the ages. Truths blurred perhaps, but not destroyed. When scholars sift through the world's oldest stories, they often find echoes of events that predate writing itself. Descriptions of floods, fire, darkness, and worlds that ended before ours began. It is tempting to dismiss them as metaphors or poetic invention. Yet when those myths emerge independently in every corner of the earth, separated by oceans and continents, one begins to wonder whether they all remember something real, a catastrophe or a civilization that vanished before memory had a name. Historians are still debating whether mythology can serve as a reliable historical source, but the evidence grows harder to ignore. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians told of a time when kings ruled from the heavens before the great flood swept the world clean. Their list of kings spans impossible reigns, tens of thousands of years before ending abruptly with the words, "Then the flood came." In India, ancient Vedic texts describe vast cities that flourished before the sea swallowed them. And in Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec peoples spoke of previous suns or ages, each destroyed by a cataclysm, wind, fire, or flood. Across the Pacific, Polynesian stories tell of lands that sank beneath the waves when the gods grew angry. Even in the Arctic, Inuit elders speak of the warm lands that vanished in smoke and water. Are these merely coincidences, or do they preserve memories of real events that occurred tens of thousands of years before recorded history? The theory that myths encode geological or astronomical realities is not new, but it has gained fresh attention with modern science. Geologists have identified abrupt climate shifts at roughly 74,000, 60,000, and 12 and 800 years ago, each corresponding to natural disasters on a global scale. The eruption of Mount Tabor, for instance, plunged the planet into volcanic winter and may have nearly exterminated humanity. The last of these cataclysms at the end of the Pleistocene melted glaciers, raised sea levels, and submerged entire landscapes, perhaps inspiring the flood myths that dominate world religion. Yet some legends contain details far more specific than mere deluge or darkness. Aboriginal Australian stories, for example, describe coastlines that once extended dozens of kilometers farther than they do today. When compared with geological data, these descriptions match the shorelines as they existed between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago. That would make those oral traditions the oldest surviving cultural memories on Earth. Similarly, in North America, the Klamath people tell of an eruption that split a great mountain in two. A story that aligns perfectly with the formation of Crater Lake nearly 7,700 years ago. If human cultures can preserve accurate geological memory over millennia, why not tens of millennia? Some scholars believe the world's flood myths may all trace back to the melting of the last major ice sheets. But others suspect something older still, an interglacial flood from nearly 100,000 years ago, when sea levels rose dramatically across Asia and Africa. If a coastal civilization existed, then its destruction would have been total. Its survivors scattered, its stories transformed into myth. What remains might be the faint recollections of survivors speaking in the symbolic language of gods and punishment. In Sumerian tradition, the god Enki warns a human Zudra to build a vessel and preserve life. In the Hebrew version, he becomes Noah. In India's Satapada Brahmana, Manu is saved by a talking fish. In Mesoamerica, Cox and his wife survive a flood in a hollow tree. In each case, a small remnant escapes, carrying memory through fire or water to a new world. The pattern is too consistent to ignore, the archetype of continuity, of knowledge passed through extinction. Beyond floods, myths describe technologies and knowledge far beyond their supposed time. In Central America, legends tell of the shining stones that spoke, used by ancient priests to see the stars. In Sub-Sahara and Africa, the Dune people recount celestial systems invisible to the naked eye, including Sirius B, a white dwarf star not officially discovered by astronomy until the 19th century. While mainstream historians attribute this to coincidence or later contact, others wonder if these tales preserve fragments of knowledge from a civilization that had already measured the heavens before recorded science. Another recurring theme is the descent of wisdom from sky beings or gods who taught early humans agriculture, astronomy, and writing. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, the Egyptians, the Needus, the Maya, this. In nearly every version, the teachers arrive after a great destruction, bringing order to chaos. The implication, though wrapped in theology, is that knowledge survived, carried by the few who remembered. Whether those survivors were divine, foreign, or simply remnants of a pre-existing culture, the myth remains the same. Civilization was reborn from the ashes of one that came before. What makes these stories more haunting is how they align with the archaeological record. Around 12,000 years ago at Besip, humans suddenly began building complex stone temples with astronomical precision. But these builders had no agriculture, no cities, no apparent precursors. It was as though they inherited techniques rather than invented them. As though they remembered something they could no longer explain. Could their ancestors have been survivors of an old tradition, one that originated in the forgotten interglacial world of 97,000 years ago? Myth may hold the key, not as literal history, but as symbolic memory. The human brain evolved to encode stories, not data. When disaster struck, those stories became the vessel for survival. A way to preserve experience when writing did not exist. Thus, when the earth flooded, ancient people told of gods who drowned the world. When fire rained from the sky, they spoke of divine wrath. But beneath the metaphor lies a factual substrate: volcanoes, meteor impacts, shifts in the heavens. Modern research has already confirmed that some myths describe real cosmic events. For example, the Navajo and Hindu traditions of fire serpents in the sky correspond to known Kumtri impacts in the late Pleistocene. Historians are still debating how far such correspondences can go. Some argue that collective memory cannot survive more than a few millennia. Yet, cultural anthropologists studying oral transmission among indigenous groups have found that essential details, names of rivers, star positions, even migration routes, can persist for over 10,000 years if tied to ritual and geography. If that is true, then myths about the First World or Golden Age could indeed reach back to the time of the last great interglacial, when early humans watched the skies from lands now drowned beneath the sea. In that age, night skies were brighter, the stars closer, undimmed by pollution or modern light. Perhaps it was under those same stars that someone mapped the heavens and told stories that would survive the extinction of their world. The constellations we still use, Orion, the Pleiades, Ursa Major, appear in nearly every myth system, unchanged. Even the Dune, Greeks, and Maui identify the same star clusters with similar meanings. Coincidence or shared inheritance from a forgotten age of global storytelling. Perhaps myth is the oldest library, and we, its unknowing custodians. Each legend is a fossil carrying the shape of something that once lived. To dismiss it as fantasy is to ignore the possibility that history is far deeper than our textbooks suggest. Somewhere in the unbroken chain of tales, from the fires of Africa to the temples of the Andes, a truth hides, scattered like embers of an ancient fire. The flood, the sun, the sky gods, all might be fragments of one shared catastrophe, retold by its survivors until the event itself became divine. The lost civilization may never be found in ruins or bones, but it may live on in our words, our stories, our dreams, in the myths older than memory, whispering of a time when humans first looked to the heavens and remembered that they had seen the end of the world once before. Every civilization seeks order in time. We divide history into eras, mark years with calendars, and trace a neat evolution from primitive to modern. But beneath that comforting structure lies an unsettling truth. Time, as recorded by human science, is fragile, easily distorted, often rewritten. What if the timeline we trust is broken? What if entire chapters of humanity's past, our tens of thousands of years, were lost not only to catastrophe but to the limitations of our own instruments? The more archaeologists dig, the more they find that history does not proceed in a straight line. It loops, contradicts, and collapses like the ruins it studies. Historians are still debating how many times our species has been forced to start over. The geological record shows periodic collapses, supervolcanoes, ice ages, sudden oceanic floods that would have erased almost all evidence of culture. Yet, when radiocarbon dating was first introduced in the 20th century, it gave us the illusion of certainty. With it, scientists believed they could measure time like a clock, counting backward through the millennia. But radiocarbon dating depends on the constancy of carbon levels in the atmosphere. A constancy that, as later discovered, does not exist. Solar activity, volcanic gases, and magnetic reversals all alter carbon ratios, distorting the readings. What if a civilization living 97,000 years ago now appears only as scattered dates that make no sense? In several cases, this appears to be exactly what has happened. Sites across Africa and the Middle East have yielded artifacts whose ages conflict wildly with stratigraphy. Tools in the Jebel Fire complex of the United Arab Emirates, for instance, were dated to around 125,000 years ago. Yet, their craftsmanship matches that of tools made tens of thousands of years later. Similar anomalies exist in Israel's caps and school caves, where anatomically modern humans buried their dead. 90,000 years before the supposed Cultural Revolution. These were not the behaviors of primitive nomads. They were the customs of people who had already developed ritual art and grief. Some archaeologists explain these findings by suggesting that modern behavior evolved gradually and repeatedly, appearing and vanishing like sparks. Others suspect something more profound, that there were cycles of civilization long before the one we know. Each time the Earth's climate shifted or disaster struck, culture retreated into survival mode. Then slowly, memory returned and humanity rebuilt, forgetting that it had built before. The broken timeline reveals itself not only in bones and tools, but also in architecture. Megalithic sites around the world often show signs of being built atop older foundations. In Peru, the finely cut Inca walls sit on massive blocks far older and more eroded than the stones above. In Egypt, the Sphinx enclosure shows water erosion inconsistent with the arid climate of 4000 BCE, suggesting it stood through an earlier, wetter era. In Turkey, beneath the ruins of Göbekli, archaeologists have found even older layers deliberately buried by their builders as though to protect something sacred. Why bury a temple unless the world itself was ending? In science, when anomalies appear, the first instinct is to adjust the data to fit the curve. But in archaeology, anomalies accumulate faster than explanations. In coal seams millions of years old, miners have found imprints of metal objects. In geological strata older than humanity, there are carved stones, petrified wood with cut marks, and spheres that seem engineered. Most are dismissed as misidentifications or hoaxes, and perhaps they are. Yet the sheer number of such finds across centuries of excavation leaves a faint unease. Could we be glimpsing fragments of civilization so ancient that they predate even our species? The problem lies not only in dating methods, but in interpretation. Carbon dating can reach only about 50,000 years. Beyond that, scientists rely on techniques such as uranium, thorium, or luminescence dating, both vulnerable to contamination and assumption. Even a small shift in background radiation or sediment exposure can skew results by tens of millennia. A single volcanic eruption could rewrite the apparent age of an entire culture. How many primitive sites re-examined under different models might actually belong to an earlier high civilization erased by flood or ash? In 2018, researchers revisiting stone tools from Algeria's and Bouchet region realized they were 2.4 million years old, pushing back North African technology by nearly 600,000 years. Though this predates Homo sapiens, it reveals a long tradition of innovation in regions that later became home to modern humans. Civilization may not have been an invention of our species alone, but a recurring property of intelligence wherever it emerged. If so, the idea of a first civilization becomes meaningless. There may have been many, each lost to its own catastrophe. Consider also the curious case of the Younger Dus, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions around 2,800 years ago. Evidence suggests it was triggered by a comet impact or a massive solar event. The resulting floods and fires would have annihilated any advanced society of that era, erasing almost every trace. If a similar disaster occurred during the interglacial period 97,000 years ago, the effect would have been identical. Global erasure. The survivors would have preserved only fragments, myths, genetic legacies, and perhaps scattered monuments that seemed far older than they should. In this light, the timeline of human progress looks less like a ladder and more like a spiral, repeating cycles of creation and destruction. The archaeological record supports this pattern. Cultural explosions of art, architecture, and technology appear suddenly, as if from nowhere, separated by long periods of apparent stagnation. Each time, humanity rediscovers what it once knew, but never quite remembers how. Historians are still debating whether these leaps result from evolution, climate, or something deeper. Some suggest a collective amnesia, that trauma itself erases knowledge. When volcanoes blackened the skies, when seas rose and mountains fell, survivors would have abandoned everything to endure. Children born into the chaos would inherit not science, but fear. In a few generations, language itself might forget. What remains of the old world becomes legend. The Golden Age, the time before the flood. And when stability returns, those legends become blueprints. Humanity rebuilds, always chasing the shadow of its former self. Modern science has begun to expose this process through what some call chronological compression. As older and older sites are discovered, the intervals between key innovations shrink. Agriculture, once thought to have begun 10,000 years ago, may have roots twice that age. Symbolic art appears 70,000 years before the supposed cognitive revolution. Each discovery pushes the boundary backward, as if civilization were receding from us in time. Even written history, which should anchor the timeline, is far from secure. Ancient calendars often encode cosmic cycles, precession, solar years, lunar rhythms, that suggest an awareness of time far beyond necessity. The Mayan long count tracks a 26th 000-year precessional cycle identical to that known by Egyptians and Hindus. How did unconnected cultures derive the same number? Were they measuring celestial motion independently or inheriting it from a source that already understood the pattern? If that source existed, it must have been old. Older than any surviving monument, older than the last interglacial world. The mathematics of precession require thousands of years of observation passed faithfully across generations. To calculate it, one must watch the stars shift degree by degree, something no short-lived culture could achieve. Perhaps the shattered timeline is not only an error of tools, but the result of broken transmission, the loss of continuity between one age of intelligence and the next. There is another clue hidden in language. Across continents, ancient words for time share similar roots. Kel, Kron, Zamana, Ion, all evoking cycles, ages, or returns. The concept of linear history of progress and forward motion is a modern one. The ancients believed in recurrence, golden ages followed by decline, worlds destroyed and remade. Maybe they were not philosophizing but remembering. The forgotten civilization that might have existed 97,000 years ago could have been one such world. Destroyed by forces beyond comprehension, its survivors scattering and rebuilding. What we call prehistory may simply be its aftermath. Our pyramids, temples, and myths might be its children, grown dim through repetition. If this is true, the line of human history is not a timeline at all. It is a wheel turning endlessly through fire and flood, spinning civilizations into dust and then into memory. Each revolution brings us closer to the forgotten origin and farther from knowing that it ever existed. And in the ruins of that repetition, the earth remains the only historian patient and silent, keeping the secrets of time in its stones. Perhaps someday, when another cycle ends, the fragments will align again, and the wheel will complete its turn, revealing for an instant the full shape of the human story before it shatters once more. At the edge of the world, beneath sheets of ancient ice, the last remnants of the past may still be sleeping. Antarctica, a continent we imagine as silent and empty, was not always a frozen wasteland. Once it was green, its mountains stood bare and sharp, its coasts ringed with forests and rivers. Fossilized leaves found in the transantarctic mountains reveal species that thrived in temperate climates, while core samples taken from beneath the ice show layers of pollen, mud, and even traces of microbial life. What they suggest is astonishing, that Antarctica, long before the last ice age, could have supported human life. If so, perhaps the oldest echoes of civilization lie entombed not in desert or ocean, but under the most desolate place on Earth. Historians are still debating when Antarctica last stood ice-free. Geological reconstructions indicate that during the Amiens interglacial about 125,000 years ago, the western part of the continent was partially exposed and the surrounding seas were navigable. If early humans or a precursor civilization had spread globally by then, this might have been one of their final refuse. Some climatologists argue that warming events between 100,000 and 90,000 years ago could have temporarily melted the coastlines again. The idea that a culture could have existed there is speculative, but it gains weight from anomalies scattered across maps, myths, and geology. In 2017, scientists drilling through the Antarctic ice sheet retrieved a sample of sediment that contained fossilized datums, tiny planktonic creatures that only live in open water from layers buried beneath kilome of ice. These datums were dated to less than 1 million years old, suggesting that parts of the continent had been ice-free far more recently than previously assumed. Satellite radar scans also revealed strange formations beneath the ice, including linear ridges and circular depressions resembling man-made structures. Most likely they are geological, but their geometry has sparked endless fascination. The echoes from the ice, and not only physical but also mythic. Nearly every ancient seafaring culture from the Greeks to the Polynesians tells of a southern land, a terror incognito beyond the horizon. The Greeks called it Antarcticos, the opposite of the north. But how did they know such a continent existed long before its discovery in the 19th century? Some historians argue that the idea of a great southern land arose from philosophical symmetry, the belief that Earth must be balanced. Others suspect the memory of real voyages preserved through oral tradition. If ancient mariners from a lost civilization once circumnavigated the globe, their knowledge could have filtered down into later cultures, transmuted into myth. The Pyrrhus map, which first drew attention for its depiction of an ice-free Antarctic coastline, may itself be one such inheritance. The admiral's own notes claim that he compiled it from 20 charts and 8 map fragments, some drawn in the time of Alexander. If those fragments truly existed, their origin might stretch even deeper to the forgotten navigators who explored the planet before the last great freeze. The possibility of such ancient navigation seems absurd until one considers the archaeological evidence for Ice Age seafaring. Stone tools discovered on the island of Crete date to over 130,000 years ago, meaning humans had already mastered open water travel long before the Neolithic. In Indonesia's Wallace region, similar finds confirm early hopping among ancient Homo sapiens. If people could cross those waters, the oceans themselves were not barriers, but roads, and the world smaller than we thought. Nowhere does that idea feel more haunting than in the Antarctic Peninsula, where melting glaciers are exposing new landscapes for the first time in human memory. In recent decades, explorers have discovered ancient moss beds, tree stumps, and valleys carved by flowing rivers. Some of these formations date back to interglacial periods when the region's temperature was comparable to modern Scandinavia. If life thrived there once, could it have been visited or even settled by early humans following the coast southward? Ice cores taken from Antarctica's interior preserve a timeline of the planet's climate stretching back 800,000 years. Within those translucent layers lie records of volcanic ash, pollen, and even trapped air from vanished atmospheres. Yet, some cores contain anomalies. Abrupt spikes in methane and carbon dioxide levels that suggest episodes of burning perhaps on a continental scale. One such event roughly 100,000 years ago has no clear natural explanation. Some attribute it to forest fires triggered by warming. Others quietly wonder whether it could have been something else. The trace of widespread combustion, perhaps human, perhaps accidental, perhaps deliberate. Beneath the ice shelf of Wilkes Land, gravity mapping satellites have detected an enormous circular mass buried under 2 m of frozen crust. It could be a crater left by an ancient impact. But to some, it recalls something more artificial. The same geometry that reappears in myths of sunken cities. Whether meteor or monument, its presence deep beneath the polar cap adds one more riddle to a continent that seems designed to conceal truth. If a civilization truly lived during the interglacial warmth, whether in the Antarctic or the global coastal plains, then its destruction would have been swift and absolute. The return of the Ice Age around 90,000 years ago brought temperatures that fell by as much as 10 degrees Celsius, sea levels dropped by more than 100 m, storms raged. Continents fractured beneath the pressure of advancing glaciers. Within centuries, entire ecosystems vanished. Whatever humans or their cousins had built was ground to dust beneath the ice, sealed in silence for nearly 100 millennia. Historians are still debating how much of this is plausible science, and how much belongs to speculation. Yet, every new discovery of fossilized forest, every ancient pollen grain beneath the polar cap, strengthens the notion that Antarctica has not always been as we see it. If future technology allows us to melt deeper cores, or drill further into the subglacial lakes, we may find organic material, wood, soil, even remnants of tools that could change everything. For now, all we have are glimpses. The radar scans that reveal buried ridges look like the ghostly outlines of forgotten architecture. The ice cores, like transparent scrolls waiting to be read, and through them the earth seems to whisper a recurring truth. Nothing is truly lost, only hidden. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, that every age leaves behind a signature, faint but indelible. Beneath the deserts lie drowned cities. Beneath the seas, stone temples. Beneath the ice, the fossils of forgotten worlds. The pattern repeats as if the planet itself were recording its memories in layers of sediment and frost. When humanity first saw Antarctica from the air, pilots described it as another planet. But maybe it is our own past, preserved, waiting, refusing to die. If we could peer far enough into its frozen heart, we might find not alien ruins, but human fingerprints. At night, when the katabatic winds sweep across the frozen plain, the ice groans and fractures, echoing like a deep, slow drum. It is the sound of continents shifting, of time itself moving under pressure. One could imagine that the Earth is trying to speak to tell us that history is older, deeper, and more cyclical than we dare believe. Perhaps one day, when the ice retreats again, as it has before, the world will awaken to find the ruins of a city where today there is only emptiness. And maybe those who come after us will look upon its frozen towers and wonder as we now wonder who built it, why did it vanish? And what else lies sleeping beneath the endless white? Until then, we're left only with imagination and the faintest of echoes. Frozen whispers carried across epochs from one world to the next. And as the wind moves over the ice, the planet breathes quietly remembering what we have forgotten. Good night.